money, big prizes. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to be crossing off yet another classic arcade game on the Complete History Bedpost, a video game trilogy that most people don't even realise is a trilogy. Well, actually, that's debatable. A game that fills your CRT screen with arguably more blood and gore than you could possibly ever hope for. In fact, some of the people that worked on this went on to work on Mortal Kombat, so that should give you a good indication as to what you should expect with this title. One of my absolute favourites that actually inspired one of my favourite games of last year. I'm going to leave a little card up there for you if you want to go check that out. But right now, I plan to look at the complete history of Smash TV. A video game that may look mindless, and I suppose it is, but that's a good thing, because thankfully hidden underneath the exploded bodies of your enemies and even the eyeballs of your teammates is a game that puts gameplay first. Everything else is just icing on the most disgusting cake you've ever devoured. And no matter how grotesque it gets, you ain't ever gonna wanna stop munching away and collecting big prizes such as VCRs, toasters, automobiles, television, backpacks, vacations, lawnmowers, and good meat. So let's not hang about, let's get right into it, and let's go back to the beginning and look into the surprise origins of this incredibly well-loved title and find out how it all began, what inspired it, what came after, what they left out, and what they constantly teased hardcore fans with for an incredibly long time. In Smash TV, the complete history. Welcome to Slope's Game Room. One of the most surprising parts of researching this complete history is that people look at Smash TV as a one-off game with a crazy amount of ports, which of course, it's not. Yep, before even getting into Smash TV, I think we yet again need to be going back to the beginning, to the year 1981, with the release of Defender, the first new video game pumped out by Williams that wasn't a clone of something else. That something else being Pong. Of course it's Pong. You see, besides Pong, or Winner as they called it, Williams, who would eventually be absorbed by Midway, were far more focused on pinball. In fact, that was pretty much entirely what they focused on. But there was no getting around the fast rising popularity that was arcade gaming, and Williams simply wanted in on that action. Which was when Eugene Jarvis created, as stated, the company's first new video game. Heavily inspired by both Space Invaders and Asteroids. Yes, it's 1981 and we have yet another arcadey space shooter for the arcades. Regardless, Eugene was no doubt very happy with Defender's success and its follow-up Stargate, as was Williams. Both of these games are absolute classics. But now was the time to try something new. You could argue that Asteroids, Space Invaders, and of course Defender all play differently enough to make them stand out, and that was the key. It's okay if you take inspiration as long as you add your own spin on it. But Eugene, now he wanted to try something new. He started toying around with this game concept where you need to smash two robots into each other rather than actually shooting them, which was obviously the norm. But something was missing. What can he do to change up these pixelated robots and turn this robot collision game that he was halfway through designing into something, well, enjoyable? Unsurprisingly, that solution came to him when he was playing in the arcades, and to be a tad more specific, the game he was playing was a game called Berserk.
Intruder alert, intruder alert. Humanoid.
An arcade game that came out 1 year prior to Defender in 1980 by Stern, another company that had jumped from pinball to arcade, and this was their first programmed game too. By this point, you're no doubt starting to see where the true inspiration for Smash TV would eventually come from. The game wasn't exactly wildly popular, but it was in fact good enough to be a mainstay in most arcades for the time. You control this little green dude running through very simple mazes, shooting these little red alien things as quick as you can before moving on to the next stage. You need to do this quickly, otherwise the game will make this cute little smiley face appear.
Who can't die and will kill you if it touches you.
And that's the game. Kill the robots and quickly move on. Kill the robots and quickly move on. Kill the robots and quickly move on. You get the idea. As stated, the game did fine, and it was a definite great first attempt by Stern after only really publishing Konami's Astro Invader beforehand, and it was when Eugene played this game that he realised how he could do it better. You see, the problem with Berserk, especially by today's standards, was its controls. You move a guy around the screen using the joystick as standard, and you shoot with one of the fire buttons. What this means is that if you want to shoot an enemy, you need to literally run or face towards that enemy, and then you need to hit that shoot button, requiring you to quickly move out of the way as soon as that shot is fired. Eugene explains. Berserk was amazing, but I got frustrated playing it because you had to move towards enemies to shoot them. As they closed in, it was hard to kill them without killing you. One day I realised that if you hold the fire button down, your player remains stationary, but you can still move the joystick to fire bullets. A light bulb went off in my head. The joystick fires the bullets. I then thought, why not have two joysticks? One to move and one to fire. It was so obvious, such a natural control method. The idea was quickly implemented into the same Robot Collision game that it was already working on, and voila, Robotron 2084 was born. The implementation given to the player in this game that let you shoot in a different direction that you was facing was without a doubt the core of this game's magic, where Berserk was nail-biting arcadey fun because of its shoot and run or dodge mechanic. This game's new playstyle required that a lot more would be happening on the screen at once, and is simply gaming fun at its purest. One of the earliest examples that I can think of, but when you watch someone playing it, you think to yourself, what is even going on the screen? But when you're playing it, you get better and better, and you end up becoming one with the sheer craziness that is Robotron 2084. To true classic arcade and gaming fans, this game is easily one of the best arcade games going. For many years, the devs wanted to make a sequel to the game, but due to the video game crash of 1983, no matter how many times they tried, the sequel just simply didn't happen. Sure, you had Blaster that was set in the same world as Robotron, but as you no doubt know already, it was a completely different game and hardly a sequel in any way, shape or form. As time moved on into the 90s, nothing much happened for Eugene after Blaster came out. He dabbled in a few things here and there. He was actually part of the Narc design team, but that idea of wanting to make a true sequel to Robotron 2084 still stuck with him, especially when he was working with Mark Turnmill, who was an avid fan of his game. That's it, let's finally do a follow-up to Robotron 2084, a game released almost a decade earlier by this point, and a game that in all honesty doesn't need a sequel. Eugene explains that the only reason developers make sequels in the first place is either for commercial reasons or to advance the gameplay with new mechanics, but Robotron 2084 doesn't need improvements. Because of this, they decided to go down the route of capturing the original arcade style, and instead of making a sequel, they made a spin-off which was released in 1990. Smash TV. A game set in a dystopian future where you, the lucky contestant, get to traverse several different rooms in a kill or be killed game show scenario, and just like the earlier mentioned Narc, it was full to the brim with mindless gore and violence that helped with its overall appeal to young pubescent teenagers for the time. Obviously the game took heavy inspiration in not only its theme but even its announcer from The Running Man, even chucking in some Robocop references too.
I'd buy that for $1.
It's simply total carnage, just like Robotron 2084 was all of those years ago. Sure, you might dismiss it for being a bit of a gore first, gameplay later type of a game if you've never played it before, but hopefully this video has just showcased that that simply just wasn't the case. At first, this was gameplay and pretty much nothing but. It was pure gameplay of the highest degree brought into the 90s, where violence in movies, TV and games helped sell products. You know, there's just no getting around that, especially with the crowds that actually went to arcades. Smash TV took this and ran with it further than most, and in the process of doing so created a truly awesome and legendary game. Instead of being able to move around a small map similar to Alien Syndrome and, I don't know, maybe Gauntlet I suppose, what you have here is everything crammed into one screen, just like Robotron was. This gives off the same nail-biting on the edge of your seat action that Robotron did, limiting the space of where you can hide away, forcing you to keep one eye on your character but also the pattern of the enemies and your shots. But one thing they did add, however, was to bring the enemies into the arena via waves. You get to collect money and prizes and to let you choose which path you want to take. It really does help it hold up to being one of the ultimate twin-stick shooters, even by today's standards. And during the game's 15-month development, which was tricky due to the team mostly consisting of brand new coders who had never worked on a game before, even with these limitations, the main devs knew that they had something special with this game. Probably the craziest thing was when we first put the game out on test at Times Square Arcade in Broadway in Chicago. We set the game up and the players mobbed it right away. A couple of really tough looking guys got into the third wave, which never ended. Basically played forever, and we didn't want to be around when the players figured out that there was no fourth wave after putting in $20 into the machine. So we split for some pizza, we get back to the arcade about an hour later, and the same two guys are still on wave 3. It was crazy. They were playing in an adrenaline frenzy. Then the game crashes, the screen freezes and all of the colours go psychedelic. The players look at each other in frustration, the game resets and those guys stick in another $10 and started playing again. At this point we knew the game was good. And obviously it was. The game got ported endless amounts of times, but more often than not, the controls just simply didn't work. You needed 2 control sticks to play this game the way it was intended, and for the most part, that just simply didn't work. Sure, you had workarounds on certain systems like the NES and Commodore 64, among others, allowing you to use 2 controllers to give off the same arcadey feel, but without a doubt, it was Super Smash TV that did it best with its 4-way directional buttons in place of the second D-pad on the Super Nintendo. Regardless of what game was best and what was worst, the game always sold well, and to this day just never stops getting re-released on pretty much every arcade collection that allowed it to be included, which just goes to show that it really has stood the test of time. Especially if you can make it to the Pleasure Dome to pick up endless amounts of hot co-presenters. Oh, and by the way, the original release of the game in the arcades actually didn't include the Pleasure Dome Arena, even though they constantly teased it in the game. Literally, it wasn't included. It was a total scam that they left in to tease the players, in order to get as much money as possible. They even had hardcore fans contact the devs asking how to access the Pleasure Dome that's constantly mentioned throughout the game, and the absolute trolls would basically just give them some BS answer that wasn't true and sent them on their way. This resulted in plenty of people claiming to have found the Pleasure Dome online, which obviously didn't exist, which resulted in management making Eugene and his team revise the game for future created arcade units to include the almighty Pleasure Dome. After Smash TV became a massive success for arcade goers, selling well over 20,000 units, there was technically a sequel. Although, just like how Smash TV was more of a spin-off than a sequel to its earlier game, Total Carnage kind of was the same. And for me, although Total Carnage is indeed a good fun game, it's one of the best examples that I can think of when I say more isn't always better. The game scored highly, as it should, but the game is quite literally Total Carnage. It's the sort of game that you pick up once you've mastered games like Smash TV, but come on, how many people can honestly say that they've mastered Smash TV? It's almost an impossibility. But with that said, the game is good, like pretty damn good actually. But 1, it's been done before, 2, it was better before, and 3, again, this is just total carnage. You see, where Smash TV pushes you to the limits, Total Carnage pushes you past your limits. It's still good fun, but it's virtually impossible to master, unless you put untold amount of hours into it. And because of this, even though those reviewers did love it, it's got to be the main reason as to why it didn't do too well in the arcades. In fact, it was a pretty big flop. Thankfully it did pretty well on the systems it came out on too, but again, they didn't feel as good as the game that came before them either. For me, the game feels a tad more sluggish than Smash TV, stupidly harder, and opening up the arena from a single screen to a scrolling screen just kinda takes away a lot of the tactics that you mastered in the earlier titles. If this sounds like I'm, being overly harsh, perhaps I am, but please don't take it that way because, like I said, Total Carnage is a good game, but it's probably the worst of all 3. Go and check it out once you've done the previous and better titles, of course. And that, guys, is the complete history of Smash TV, a series that is loved by everyone, yet most people don't even realise that it is a series. It may not look like it has a lot going on, but it does. It was partly created by a guy that came from a time that learning a simple mechanic and then mastering that simple mechanic was the core of all memorable arcade games. And if you ask me, that mindset can be seen right here in Smash TV. Because of this, some gamers may argue what is better, Robotron 2084 or Smash TV. I suppose it depends on how retro you are. But for me, you are never going to be finding a better arcadey twin-stick shooter than Smash TV. A game that Midway just never stopped releasing to this very day. Which ironically means that you can pretty much pick this game up for around about $1.
I'd buy that for $1.
And now you can.